Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Fan Behavior and F1 Podcast. I'm Zoe. I'm here with Hannah,
Hi,
and we
guys.
are also so pleased to be joined by, I think we can now say a friend,
I hope so.
someone that we have trusted as our
Truly.
F1 source for a very long time, ESPN's very own Nate Saunders. Nate, thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thank you guys, and thanks for a really great intro. I appreciate that. I hope I'm not the only person you trust with F1 news because
There
there's a
it's
few.
few. There's few,
Yeah.
but if you trust them, we trust them.
We can
Okay.
count. Yeah, I
Cool.
think, I think we should probably tell the story of how we met
Sure.
because
Yep.
you can tell the story, Hannah.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it is so Zoe and I have loved pop culture for a very long time, and we've always said that there are very few sources that we trust that when they break news that it's probably they have a source, like it's more likely true than not true. And that's E News, TMZ, which is sometimes dicey, but mostly they get it right, and People Magazine. And you are the E News of Formula One for us.
Oh,
And we've said
that's high
that.
praise.
Yeah, we've
That's.
talked
I was
about
wondering where you were
that.
going with that.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite work it
Maybe
out.
we should be like he's the New York Times or something that's more,
Sure, but
official.
that's not like
That's
for
true.
me.
That's
I don't
true.
read the New York Times.
I'll take E News.
Yeah.
E News. I'm happy with
Because
that.
I trust them. They're dialed in. They've got people, on
the
the inside. And so when we were in Austin for the race, there was an event that Coda invited us to go to. I think there was a live podcast, which we missed because we had another obligation before, but then we saw that you were there. And so we had to tell you that we think you're our e-news for Formula One. And
Yeah.
I don't know if
Well,
it like really translated for you, like if you
I kind of.
understood the significance for us, but it's
Hmm.
really significant for us.
I think I had to process it for a few days, but yeah,
No, that's all
I think it
right.
sunk in. Yeah.
Yeah, so much so, in fact, that when VCARB announced their name, Zoe sent me the tweet that you had tweeted out about the name change. And I texted her back. I said, "This is why I love and hate that Nate is so reliable, because this is some silly tweet that should be a BuzzFeed joke, but I know it's true." And so
Oh
I like had to
yeah.
just sit with that for a minute of like, oh, it's VCARB now. Okay. I don't know what to do with that, but I know he's telling the truth.
Right.
Well, it's funny you say that, Hannah, because before I tweeted that, I was like, that's probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever tweeted. But like you said, I was like, it is true. Like I've been
Yeah.
told that by a few people. And I was like, I can't believe this is. I was like hitting send and thinking this is a sad day.
Yeah.
It's downhill from here. But
Well, we
no, I
believed
appreciate that.
you. We knew it was true.
Well, speaking of Visa Cash App RB, that's the breaking news of the week. That's the first thing we have to discuss. I guess initially, well, you revealed in your article in that there was other people in contention, other sponsors in contention, but how do you ultimately now, maybe a week or so out from the reveal, how do you feel about the name Visa Cash App RB?
I don't know if you guys are the same, but it just still doesn't. It doesn't do anything for me. I've not come to terms with it in any way. I know obviously we've had Red Bull come in and change the name to Red Bull and Alpha Tauri, etc. When that happened, and we can get into kind of kick, stake, Sauber, stake, kick, whatever order of words that's going to be. But this one felt a little bit. I don't know. It felt because they've dropped the Racing Bulls thing that was being thrown around. It's almost like you're being forced to call them Visa Cash App because there's nothing. You can't really call them RB because it's confusing with Red Bull. So I don't know if from that point of view, it felt a bit grubby in that sense. You know what I mean? And I don't know. It's a team I've always liked, and I've always wondered what the end goal for Red Bull was with that team. So to kind of give it such a corporate name, I think was losing a lot of its identity in that sense. You could, I suppose, argue that it always just, it was named after a clothing brand before this and Toro Rosso before that, which is literally just Italian for Red Bull, which like to my shame, it took me a few years, even though I can speak a bit of Italian, didn't quite click that that's what they'd done with it. I just was like, oh, Toro Rosso. Oh, yeah, okay. And when I was about 22, I was like, I'm going to pretend I've always known that. So yeah, it really hasn't sunk in, and I think that that's the same for most people. I don't know. I just can't see if I think VCARB will be what we're calling it, and it's just such a at least with with Alfa Romeo, they had it's a car brand, or with Stake, you can still call them Sauber if you want to, because it's kind of Team Kick, Stake, Sauber. Or I think that's the full name.
It's hard to know. It depends on what country they're in.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. Whereas with this one, yeah, they've kind of cornered us all into having to say the same thing, which kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it kind of was rumored for a long time that Racing Bulls was going to be a part of the name, and we had talked about how we did not like that name. But now that we know it's Visa Cash App RB, I wish it was Racing Bulls, because that at least sounds better.
Yeah, we took it for granted.
We took it for granted, right? Exactly. And I don't know. I mean, as you said, they want you to call it Visa Cash App RB. They want you to say the sponsor names, but I still don't really understand why they took away the Racing Bulls part of it, because every team, well, I shouldn't say every team, but lots of teams have like the nickname part of it. I mean, we don't say Oracle Red Bull Racing. We just say Red Bull. So I don't really understand that part of it. It just, it feels like it's like a word stuff. Like they just like stuffed a bunch of words together.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it is. Yeah. And I get it, like from a sponsorship perspective. But I think what also threw me off is when the big panic about the Instagram name change happened, and it was like they deactivated their account, whatever. When they had RB in there, I was just like, oh, it's Racing Bulls, because obviously making that whole name on an Instagram handle would have been ludicrous and way too long. And then to find out that no, that's literally the entire name, was just like, I just wanted a little bit more than that, and I guess VCARB sounds like an engine part.
Yeah, right.
You know,
or a diet or something.
Yeah. People have been like, it's their weight loss program.
Yeah. The funny thing with Racing Bulls is ever since, so some of the background to this was when Dietrich Mateschitz passed away, the big question was what happens now with Red Bull generally, but also in terms of, Formula One having two teams, which was always his thing. His son now owns about 49% of the overall company, and they were going to sell the company to begin with. Sorry, sell the company to begin with, sell the team to begin with. And he always said, well, Dad wanted two teams, so selling's not an option. Let's sell the name. Let's make it more competitive. And Racing Bulls, as soon as that decision was made, Racing Bulls was kind of something I heard every other week when I talked to people at Red Bull. Like, it'll be something like Racing Bulls. Then you'd ask about a month later, oh, no, Racing Bulls is off the table now. We're not calling it that. Next month. So what's the name now? Oh, we're thinking something like Racing Bulls. And I'd be like, okay, pretty sure that was off the table last month. It's like, no, it's back on now. Then the next month, no, Racing Bulls, no, that was a silly idea. We're not doing that. The next month, you can see where this is going. It just kept coming back into and it's almost like they couldn't think of anything better than Racing Bulls.
Yeah.
And there were some other companies involved, as you mentioned, Zoe, that I think some of them liked it, some of them didn't. I mean, I don't know. I think JP Morgan was one that was, I think they hated the name. And then Visa Cash App, at one point, I was told it was going to be Visa Cash App Racing Bulls about 2 weeks before. And then the Racing Bulls bit was dropped. So all very confusing. And I mean, yeah, I'm the same as you in terms of saying I hated it until I heard the alternative.
Yeah.
And then I was like, no, Racing Bulls would have been great. Even though it's confusing with Red Bulls, with Red Bull, at least we could have had something to call it. So it was strange following that, because I did sometimes feel like there's a room full of people trying to come up with a name, and the best they've come up with is Racing Bulls. It just didn't really make sense for such a big company. Yeah,
well, and Red Bull, which is like the marketing company of all marketing companies. You know what I mean? Like they're so good at so much that I was like, certainly I was just surprised at the lack of creativity, I guess. And I'm sure behind closed doors with those level of sponsorships, like there's a lot more people that have to agree on things, and so I'm sure it's obviously not as easy as we all make it sound, but it'll be interesting. And just like how you bring in, like, it's just a mouthful to say. Like, I'm just picturing social content with Yuki and Daniel trying to say their full name, and it's just not going to go well. So at least I guess they have, the VCARB for short. I'm sure that will help.
I think they've got two good drivers for that, at least. I think from a social point of view, they can, I think one thing I've heard a couple of people say is that they can kind of ride the wave of the negativity by using the name with those two guys. So that at least will have some fun. If there's two other drivers who maybe wouldn't have just been like, oh, I don't know what the name is. But Ricardo, I imagine for half the season, half of the jokes he makes is just going to be about how stupid the team's called. What the team's name.
I was going to say, we're both obviously very big fans of Daniel, fans of Yuki, and I made the joke when it was announced, like, well, now I'm just going to have to buy a bunch of VCARB merchandise because I made the decision, years ago to be a big fan of these two, and so it's like they suckered me into this.
Right.
Well, I saw that you guys have created some merch already, right? From your
We did,
from your
actually.
socials.
Hold on.
Quality.
Hold on,
I mean,
I have
the
it
good
right
news
here.
is that blue is both of our colors, so at least they're still leaning into the blue piece. But yeah, Zoe, for anyone
Nice.
who's listening only, Zoe is showing our VCARB merch, which is featured on our Instagram. at
Not
TikTok
available for
V.
sale right now, but
Which is a shame. I think for the next season, you guys have got to get onto
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of giving like when people like rip a piece of paper and put it on like a shirt, it looks like jagged edges. Like I
Yeah.
feel like they could make merchandise like
Yeah.
based off of our
I mean, I think we should
creation.
get on the phone with someone and just
Yeah.
tell them our ideas.
Yeah, but I was gonna say, I don't really care what the team is called if they're fast, if they're good, if they make good improvements. And so do you envision that like this injection of, I'm assuming, a good deal of cash and whatnot is going to really help them climb up the leaderboard, so to speak?
Yeah, I really do. I don't think it will be immediate because I think
Okay.
that obviously they're taking over the team that was pretty uncompetitive last year,
Mhm.
but they're moving bits of the team operation over to Milton Keynes to be a bit closer to Red Bull. Most of the operation will stay in Faenza, but they're bringing in so much kind of focus to that team, and it's always been a bit weird with Toro Rosso / AlphaTauri because Red Bull always kind of almost kept them at arm's length a little bit. You felt it was like our drivers can go there, our young guys just go and try and be quick there, and then we'll call on you when we need you. Now with this deal and the fact that Visa Cash App, the deal was with Red Bull globally. They're going to be on the Red Bull car as well. There's a huge impetus now to make that team really competitive. Obviously, Zach Brown has had a few things to say about that, suggesting. I'm not sure if you saw. It was even end of last year. He was saying, basically implying, is it a way to get around the cost cap, which is super complicated, and I don't know if there's any credence to what he's saying, but yeah, they should be more competitive, and we can get more into it when we talk about drivers and stuff. But one of the main reasons I never felt like Ricciardo would go to Red Bull last year or to replace Perez was for this exact reason. I think that the goal is to make this team. They're never going to be as competitive as Red Bull, but I think it's to get them into that group of cars at least that Aston kind of fought himself into last year, and to be up there for podiums, comfortably in Q3 all the time.
Yeah.
So if you've got a guy like Ricciardo, you can say to Visa Cash App, well, you've got basically the most marketable guy on the grid, one of the most popular drivers on the grid, and he seems like he's in a good place. He's back to his old self. So yeah, I think by the end of the year, I'd be surprised. I mean, it'd be a real surprise and a real disappointment, I think, for everyone if they were still the team that they finished last year as. Because I think the expectation is you'll see that curve quite quickly going up. But that's the big question: is how big is that? Is the step? Are they just going to fifth? Are they going to be with Alpine, or are they actually going to step up to that kind of McLaren Mercedes kind of, which would be huge? And obviously Aston did that, then dropped off.
True.
But Red Bull, they've not really said what they think it is. They just say we think big improvements are coming. So
Yeah.
I think that'll be the big talking point this season either way, because they'll either achieve that and everyone will be like, that's amazing, or they won't. And then Visa Cash App, who are spending a lot of money on that name, are suddenly thinking, why did we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, we can, if their car's fast, we can probably kind of start getting on board with a name like that. But
Totally.
if they're not good, then you're the laughing stock. Like it's sort of a
That's
risk
it. It would make it
reward.
worse almost, wouldn't it? Because
Yeah.
you've changed this team name and you're finishing ninth every. So
Right.
you're ninth in the championship or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a lot to that as well.
Okay, next sort of big piece of news that happened fairly recently was Charles Leclerc re-signing with Ferrari. A lot of speculation about how long the contract is. Do you have any idea of how long it is? What should we expect? How much longer is Charles tied with Ferrari?
So it's a really good question because we spent a lot of last week trying to work this out. I think it's a 2+1, which is quite common in F1. So that would be 25, 26, and then options on both sides for 27, which would be the smartest step for Charles to make, because obviously if Ferrari aren't very good in 26, he can kind of just abandon ship and get out. If they are good, he can obviously extend without losing that opportunity to stay there. There was some reporting in the Italian media that 5 years, but I've not heard that that's the case. But Charles has signed long deals before, so I was like, of all the drivers on the grid, probably him, Max, Lando have signed a lot longer deals than other drivers. But my understanding is it's 2+1 at least.
Okay.
But the funny thing with F1 contracts, there's a lot of other things kind of baked into them. So it could be 2+1, and then he has the first option to negotiate for for years 4 and 5, even though they're not in the deal type thing. So I can see Charles staying there, for the rest of the decade at least.
Forever.
Yeah.
Like yeah. Basically, until they're
Yeah.
dragging him out of the car, like he needs to leave now.
Yeah.
Yeah, for better or for worse, he is gonna.
He's Ferrari.
He's Ferrari. Yeah, we've
Yeah,
said this.
right.
It's like he's just gonna like.
I truly just can't see him anywhere else. I mean,
Yeah.
I know he's driven other places, but yeah, we've talked about this. The only place I could see him going is Mercedes, and I just don't. Even that feels a little far fetched. Not that he wouldn't want to or they wouldn't want him. It's just he's supposed to wear red.
Yeah. So
And I think there's.
No,
Sorry,
go ahead.
on, sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say that it's just such a pull as well for being the driver that wins with Ferrari after so long. And
Right.
he's been there so long. And you're right, he is, everyone thinks he's Ferrari, but for him as well, they've been with him so long. So I think winning anywhere else would almost feel a little bit, not cheaper because it would still be a world championship, right?
Sure.
But the pull of that story, whoever is the first guy to win for Ferrari, like down in future, they'll basically be legendary status straight away back in Italy. So I think there's a lot of that to it as well. And Charles always talked about how much that would mean to him.
Yeah, and I feel like he probably thinks in the back of his head, like, at some point it's gonna click. At some point it's all gonna come together, and it's just gotta wait it out. Just keep waiting. But knowing Charles' luck, I feel like he's gonna be waiting his entire life.
I don't think his entire life, but a good chunk of it.
I always feel with Charles because obviously, he's as talented as he is. He looks the way he does. I'm always like, it would make sense that he was kind of almost cursed to be the unluckiest driver in F1 forever. So I feel like there's some of that at play, but I hope not, because what got me into Formula One was Ferrari, back as a kid. So them not winning has always felt strange. And Charles does look like he looks like he deserves to kind of be on that list of winners at this point. He feels like if you put him there next week, it wouldn't look out of place, where some drivers might still look out of place.
Yeah. We've always said Charles Leclerc and Daniel, it's like they have everything going for them in every other aspect of their life. So it makes sense that they struggle with their decision making, engines.
Fernando as well, actually.
Yeah, Fernando. With that. So maybe there's very true.
Maybe kind of maybe there's something to this. There's like a scale, and the more you slide it one way, the luck goes the other way. I don't know.
Yep. The next piece of it is people are wondering what's going to happen with Carlos Sainz and some, discussion about there's been a stall in the negotiation on both sides with Carlos and Ferrari. What do you think is going to happen with Carlos?
My guess is that he'll end up at Audi in 2026.
Okay.
For a few reasons. One, because I don't think he's ever going to be the guy at Ferrari, even though he's had some good performances. But Charles just feels like kind of the chosen one of that team, and Carlos is almost like, oh yeah, he's there as well.
Yeah.
But Audi, they'll have a lot of money to throw at that operation. Andreas Seidel is there, and they work together at McLaren. And I think that, I think eventually he'll end up there. But obviously, that would be 26. So the question would be, does he go to Alfa next year, almost write that season off and say, sorry, not to Alfa, to Stake, almost write that season off, embed yourself with the team, and then be good for 2026? Or do you sign a 1-year contract with Ferrari, which Sainz has always hated doing? He's hated having 1-year deals because it means that halfway through that next season, all the media, people like me, are basically shoving microphones in his face saying, when are you signing, what are you doing next year? And he doesn't really like that constant cycle. So it's an interesting one. And because Audi is what makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I think if Ferrari put the same kind of deal as they've given Charles, I feel like he'd turn around and say, well, actually, I know what I'm getting here. I know this team now quite well. So yeah, it's hard to see him at any other place than those two teams for me. But I don't know if you guys think that maybe there's a fit elsewhere for him that might be better.
Well, we sort of not really seriously talked about it because, well, obviously we don't have any sway on where he ends up. But I floated out the idea of, is there a chance he could get and we can talk about this later perhaps, but the other Red Bull seat?
That's an interesting one, because with Red Bull Juniors, I feel like with him, I think Red Bull might have him back at this point, but I don't think he'd go back, actually.
Really? Why?
I know about Carlos internally. I think he felt quite jilted by them.
Yeah.
They'd put a lot into him, and obviously they went kind of more in the direction of Max. They never backed him in the way that he felt he should have been. And he's really had to kind of claw his way. You know, he had the time at Renault, then he had McLaren, and now he's had Ferrari. And I feel like if he went back to Red Bull, I think there's a lot of pride there from him, and I think
Okay.
he'd look at it and say, you know, you guys don't deserve me now. I'm this good. But also, I think a lot of drivers look at it and think, realistically, if Max is there, are you ever really going to be able to be the best you can be?
Mhm.
And I think for Carlos, I think he's already, guys like him and Ricardo can probably say it'd be a great option, but I kind of know where I stand
Right.
with Verstappen, Horner, Helmet, etc. So I would say no, but I mean it's still an option that's in play, especially if their car is still as good as it is now. It's always an option because ultimately, if a car's really great, I think a driver can kind of swallow their pride a little bit and say, you know what, I've forgiven you guys now.
Mhm.
Let's do this. So that I don't think that's the you're completely out of the question at all.
What, Lando?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was like, what are you looking at? So the other driver announcement that happened is Lando resigned at McLaren. Were you
Mhm.
surprised that he's resigned so early, or why do you think he resigned so early? I was kind of threw me off guard that it happened
Very
as soon as it
surprised.
did.
Yeah, very surprised. But it's doubly surprising because he signed early last time as well. He signed in
Mhm.
21 and he signed a long deal, which kind of took him out of the drive market discussions for the next couple of years. Um, and I think he probably could have waited around to get this deal done because I don't think McLaren are in a rush to replace him. So it's not like if he'd waited a bit, they'll say, well, there's not really any other real options. Zach Brown has invested a load in Lando as a kid. So I don't know. It was weird, the timing of it. And I think it shows how much he was impressed by what McLaren did last year. But I think actually this is Zach Brown. I think the deal is probably a lot better than it might have been had Red Bull not been pursuing Lando. And part of me thinks, I think there was some interest from Red Bull, but part of me thinks that Horner loves to kind of, you know, get stuck into other teams. And I think a lot of what he was saying publicly about Lando was kind of just to be divisive. He said things about Lewis, you know, he's like, I'm surprised
Mhm.
so Christian Horner came up to me on the grid last year and was like, what's the latest with Lewis and Ferrari? And I was like, I don't think there is anything, Christian, you know, and he was like, well, interesting. And just walked off. And it was like, okay, I feel like that's not, I feel like that's you being very cheeky. But I think the Lando, as much as Red Bull would love to get Lando and they've tried to get him before, I think Zach saw that interest and thought, let's just draw a line under it, get this
Yeah.
deal done. And Lando, to his credit, he does absolutely love that team, McLaren. You know, he's really invested in, you know, what the goal is. And he did admit when we spoke to him earlier this week, when it was announced at the start of last season, when things weren't looking great, he did start to think, is this the team for
Mhm.
me? And then obviously they had that huge turnaround, and it was the first time he'd seen real indication of this team can get its act together. They've got this new wind tunnel now that should help them in the future. So I think for him as well, the same thing I said with Sainz, he probably realized he'd get a year of the same question, speculation, etc. And a lot of these drivers like to just have that out of the way, just
Yeah.
who I am for the next few years. But I still was surprised because I think he's probably closed off some interesting avenues that, even if they weren't things he wanted to do as
Mhm.
leverage, probably
Yeah.
could have helped him down the line. So yeah, surprising, but yeah, great deal for him, and for McLaren to sew up because I don't know, I felt like Lando was the guy coming into the year. I was like, Lando's the guy that's going to change the whole driver market, whether he leaves or not. It's all going to hinge
Mm.
on him.
Mhm.
And then this new deal comes out, and it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of you know, that's all been put to bed straight away.
Do you think that this means McLaren, like, do you envision them really staying at the top level for many years going forward consistently with the pairing of Lando and with Oscar together?
I think that's the most exciting driver lineup on the grid right now, just in terms of just how talented they are, um, and just both so young as well. I mean,
Mhm.
Piastri, what he did last year was fantastic, and Lando, I feel like he's quite hard on himself a lot of the time, some of the mistakes he makes, but I think he's right there with Charles in terms of talent. You know, I think he looks at what Max is doing and he thinks there's no reason I can't do that
Yeah.
if I had the same car. You know, and I think a few of the younger guys think that. Um, the really interesting thing for me, I think the next 2 seasons, McLaren can be really close to Red Bull because they've got this new wind tunnel. Like I said, they've got the two drivers locked down. They're on an upward trajectory. The thing in 26, when all these engine rules change, they'll be one of the only big teams that won't have their own project. They'll have Mercedes. You know, Aston Martin will have Honda. Audi obviously coming in with their own project, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull are building their own engines, and then McLaren are kind of the odd one out with a Mercedes engine. So I don't know how that dynamic will work, because often you see when engines become the focus, you kind of have to be building your own engine. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard to predict. But I think what Zach Brown has done over the past year and a half has been really good. So he took a lot of flack for a long time in terms of where that team was going. And last year, you really saw that was turning around. So I think Lando's probably seen that as well and thought it's not a bad place to tie yourself down to. Obviously, Red Bull would be great, but I think McLaren's right behind that in terms of prospects going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you became a team.
I have always been a driver first fan, and I'm a McLaren girl. Like, I love the two of them. I think they're so good. I don't know. I was so excited to see how much the team changed over the year. And I think for Oscar too, like when he first came on board, no one knows anything about him. We came in through Drive to Survive. So I am so much involved in the stories of who these drivers are. And so then as Oscar got better, we saw him more, and I just think that two of them together are funny, and yeah, they've got obviously youth on their side, and I don't know, they're a fun dynamic to watch. And I also think it's funny that they don't seem to know much about each other outside of racing, because what was the video that they didn't know that
they didn't know that each other had
siblings. I was like, have you ever met? Yeah. Now, I don't know if it was a joke because I didn't get, but I think they were like, wait, you have sisters? He's like, I have 3 of them.
No, I've not seen that video, but that is an interesting part of it, the dynamic between the two of them, because Lando's always had an older teammate than him, and now he's the older one. So I've always wondered how that will play out. Oscar, when you talk to him, you almost have to remind yourself. Off the top of my head, I think he's 22. Maybe he's.
I think 22. Yeah, I think you're right.
But you talk to him, and you'd think, okay, he's in his kind of mid to late 20s, just the way he talks, the way he carries himself, and that's. And then he drives like that as well.
Right. So
really, you can see why Zach Brown went to court to get him. Like,
yeah, exactly.
obviously shows what he thought of him, from a long time ago.
Yeah, we always admire his just his demeanor on track, and just how incredibly calm he is, and doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low.
Yeah.
Just it's so impressive for a guy his age, because I feel like most young drivers are just we see it with Charles Leclerc, we see it with Lando, just
even I get road rage, and I'm not doing anything serious.
And
so
he's just
impressive.
steady Eddie. Very impressive. Okay. There's just been so much genuinely, but Madrid was announced as a new race in 2026. And I feel like there's a lot of discussion now. People are starting to kind of get concerned that there are too many street tracks, and that, of course, they're taking away the permanent racetracks and replacing them with the street tracks. How do you feel about this new change?
Yeah, it concerns me as well. And I think the trend is there, isn't it? If you look at, there was a stat going around, which I'm probably going to butcher completely because I always remember these things kind of half correct. But I think it's of the last 5 races, I think 4 have been street circuits. Qatar obviously was a purpose-built circuit, but then again, it's not even, the most exciting purpose-built circuit. So the trend really is going towards that. And I mean, I think if you look back, I mean, COTA is one of the more recent proper circuits that has joined the calendar, built specifically for Formula One. And look how popular it is.
Yeah,
it's one of the ones everyone loves. And I think what is concerning is that the finances of the deal. If I'm sure you guys saw the map of where that is in Madrid, it's kind of a nondescript part of town. Kind of looks like it goes around kind of, I don't know what you guys call it in America. We would say an industrial estate, kind of a lot of big warehouses just all kind of strewn together.
Yeah. Same sort of thing.
Yeah. And it kind of goes around that part of town, which is part of a redevelopment of that part of the city. And that's why I think city circuits are becoming more of a thing, because you can go to a city and say, hey, how about we link a redevelopment project with this street circuit? And then you can, if you're standing for re-election, you can point to, hey, look what we've done here. It's a bit like the Olympics, when you host the Olympics, when that was in London, it regenerated that part of East London it was in. So it was massively popular here. It turned out to be a great event as well. Harder to do that with just a circuit, because otherwise people look at it and say, okay, well, other than that week it's hosting Formula One, what are we benefiting from this, really? Whereas if you're looking at it from Madrid's point of view, they can say, well, look, the whole part of town has changed now. So I think that trend will continue, because, I mean, that got a 10-year deal. I think Belgium, the last 2 years, has just had a year extension every time. Silverstone gets kind of small extensions. So you notice as well in the contracts, all the proper, quote unquote, proper facilities get 1, 2, 3 years. I think Bahrain got 15 years 2 years ago, just kind of, and I know that's not a street circuit, but as a newer venue
Right.
coming in, I think for a lot of the more traditional F1 circuits, it's really difficult to compete financially just because of the realities of it. So it is worrying because, like you said, street circuit comes in. I don't think Barcelona is anyone's favorite circuit by any stretch, but it's still a historic venue. It's had so many great races. I think I counted 12 world champions have won a race there. That's really hard to replicate that kind of history. So it is a shame, but sadly, I think it's the way the sport's going. Because I mean, we talked about South Africa coming on recently. They had a issue with money. It was hard for them to get the money, and it was an old circuit called Kailami. And now there's a talk of a street race in Osaka in Japan. I mean, imagine if they took Suzuka off for that. I mean, it sounds
Right.
you think, and sometimes street circuits can be great, but if it comes at the expense of great circuits, I think that's when the issue comes. So yeah, it is worrying. And I don't know. I think the circuit itself didn't look that great either. I don't know if you saw the onboard of it.
Yeah.
But I feel like you can never fully appreciate a street circuit from a video game because
Yeah.
Vegas looks terrible. And then
Right.
when the Vegas race happened, I was like, this is the greatest circuit that's ever been existed.
Yeah,
right.
Obviously it's not that good, but at the time it was like, this race is fantastic. So
Yeah.
I think it may be better than it looks, but yeah, it's hard not to feel a little bit worried about where it's all going.
Well, then it's interesting. Like, I just think about the negative impact in a lot of ways, or at least like this, anecdotally, the conversations about the people who actually lived in Vegas when that was all going on, and like how these other cities are going to be actually impacted, like the residents of said city, not just like the fact that we're losing potentially like, iconic circuits, but also how is the sport negatively impacting the cities that they're in. I don't know. I just feel like, Vegas, I'm sure they'll streamline things for sure, but there's 9 more years of that race happening. And so those residents are going to be impacted for at least another 9 years and probably more than that after the 9. So it'll just be interesting to see. I don't know how that turns out.
Yeah, you're right. And with Vegas, what I'm really fascinated to see, every time I got an Uber or every time I went to get lunch or had a drink at a bar or something like that, every single local you spoke to about Formula One would just go on a rant about how much they hated it. Every single one. There wasn't a few you found like, it's not as bad as everyone says. It was to a person. It was, we hate it. But going back next year, having seen it once, if they're still that against it, I think that's it's a really fair point of they don't care how good the race is. It's still impacting them, for Vegas, I think that impacted them for months on end because of all of the construction. Traffic was awful, and you could kind of walk around where you needed to be from our side, but for some of them, they said they were leaving an hour earlier just to get to work and stuff, and they weren't being compensated for that, for that extra hour. So yeah, and I think that the Madrid race, it may help that it's just kind of out of town a bit. But even then, there's the locals around Hard Rock hate it. The people that live in that, I think it's called Miami Gardens, the area just south of the stadium. So this is one thing Formula One needs to be careful of, is kind of like charging into a new city and just kind of pissing everyone off in the area and then just leaving and saying, well, it was a great race, so see you next year.
Yeah.
Right. And also, like, so many of these decisions obviously are decided based off of money and financial reasons. But, the reason that the sport is popular is because, like, the racing is great and it's exciting and it's getting more and more close. And if the street races, I mean, we've had Miami for a couple of years, haven't been the best races. And it's like you're going to alienate your fans if you're removing the tracks where there are great races and you're replacing them with tracks that are subpar. So that's also the risk as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think the viewing figures in the US were down 8% this last year on ESPN. So, and part of that's because Max is winning, but you're right. The product ultimately is what people want to see. We spent months and the week leading up to it in the media talking about how great Vegas is, etc. I messaged friends at home and they said, "Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to watching that race Sunday." They hadn't paid any attention to to some of the stuff around it because ultimately it was like, all I care about is what happens on race day. And we're quite guilty of it in the F1 media. You can become so obsessed with the story of Vegas or the story of Madrid, and you realize that that's great when you're there, but if you're not there, ultimately you turn the TV on Saturday to watch qualifying or Sunday to watch the race, and then that's it. You then talk about that Monday with your friends.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100% right. And I think, yeah, street circuits. I feel like people just hate street circuits as well. They hear street circuit and people kind of, it's like they're holding up, like holding vomit in. They're like, I hate it. Like it's this reaction of just complete negativity, which isn't always fair, but I think it comes from that, doesn't it?
For me, it's like you have to prove yourself to me. Like prove that you're good, and then I'll be interested. Like I feel like Singapore has done a decent job of proving itself as an interesting, relatively exciting race. You know, Vegas I felt like was good. Like there's a handful that I'm like, okay, you've produced a handful of good races, like you can stay. But if you repeatedly are just not delivering the goods, you gotta hit the road.
You gotta get out.
Yeah. And that's what's hard too. I mean, I totally understand too when you like why the like contracts are so much longer for street tracks, because it's obviously a much heavier commitment. And if you need to build permanent facilities, doing that for 1 year obviously doesn't make sense. But it also is a bummer in the sense that if the racing isn't actually good, you wish you could almost back out of it sooner than, 9 years down the road. But
yeah. So it's a long haul if you suddenly don't like a race, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, oh my God, we got to get rid of this thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, really quick, before we get into some of the storylines for 2024, the last big piece of news is that we've lost Gunter Steiner in the F1 community. Yeah. And I'm just curious.
Not dead.
I know he's not dead. He's still alive, thank God. But
feels like he died.
I felt like it was a big loss to the Drive to Survive fans out there. Just he was there when we first started our journey in F1. And I've heard mixed reviews. Like I think obviously this is the first thing Haas maybe hasn't tried in a while, is changing like the top leadership and kind of mixing things up. But obviously he's a great personality, but that's not the most important piece. So I'm just curious kind of what your thoughts are, if it will be better for Haas, or if you think they're kind of just ruined forever, because I'm worried that they might just be ruined forever. And then what do you think Gunter's going to do next?
Ruined forever is a really good way of putting it. In like pull quotes, like Haas ruined forever. Just a summary.
Feel free to take it if it ever.
Yeah, no, I may well say that. I'll credit you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I feel like that's not. It's a fair feeling to think that could happen, because Steiner. I said when it happened, I wrote like a reaction to it. And one of the things I put in there was that even though Gene Haas's name has been on the cars the whole time, Steiner has been the face. He's been the brain behind it. He was actually the guy that Gene Haas basically went to and said, help me get this team on the grid. So to lose that is almost as big as losing Gene Haas from it. It's actually probably bigger than that. And every decision, I mean, sometimes you'd forget, talking to Steiner, that he almost answers to someone. You almost forgot that there's a guy above this guy, because he was so in control of everything. The thing that will really, I think, tell is when they brought MoneyGram in last year, or was it maybe the end of 22 when they got that on the car. Yeah. There was a press conference with Gunther, with Gene, and with the head of MoneyGram, whose name I can't quite remember at the moment. But he was asked, "Are you buying into a Formula One team? Are you buying into Haas, or are you buying into Team Steiner, into brand Steiner?" And he was like, honestly, it's a bit of everything. We probably wouldn't have been as interested as we were if Steiner hadn't been here, because he is such a personality. He is someone that instantly people see and they're like, oh, that's the guy from Drive to Survive. Like, I know him. He's the guy that swears all the time, has that kind of funny accent that I can't place.
Yeah.
And so for him to have gone, I think is a really big deal. And like, they're not exactly flush for sponsors. It's not like they've got a ton of things on the car. So I think that's going to be interesting. Komatsu's come in. He's a rookie team boss. And personality-wise, I don't know him that well. I've spoken to him a couple of times. I don't think he's going to be... I think it's impossible to replace a guy like Steiner.
Sure.
Especially if you're trying to do that. And I think he said... my colleague went up to his first kind of press conference, but he said, I'm not going to try and be Gunther, which I think is a good start. If you tried to suddenly start swearing and start kicking doors down and stuff like that, like people might say, I don't think that's really you. But yeah, I think it'll be a huge loss. And I think within the team, a lot of people are worried about just what it means, kind of across the board. Because if sponsors are less interested in you, does Gene just turn around one day and say, you know what, I'm going to sell this team because I can't fund it at the moment. We're not being competitive. And ultimately his big thing was, we want to be competitive. Steiner said to him, well, if we're going to be competitive, you have to invest more in the team. And Gene Haas said, no, you've got to be competitive with what you have. And I think the two of them just said, we're clearly not on the same page. Let's go our separate ways. So it's hard to see how a rookie team boss coming in is going to have a better impact on the team than Gunther did.
Yeah.
So long way of answering that I do agree with what Hannah said, that it's kind of, that is the worry. In terms of what he does next, I'd love to see him do punditry or do a podcast. I heard some rumors that he might be looking to do that anyway last year.
Okay.
So now I feel like he's just opened up his
Sure.
schedule. But what I do know is that I think he's very reluctant to go back to being a team boss. I think what he had at Haas was so special and so unique. He's not going to get that anywhere. If he goes to most other teams, he's got a board to answer to. And him and Gene always had a very straightforward relationship, which was kind of shown by the fact that when they really disagreed, they just said, all right, this isn't going to work. Let's just end.
Right.
So yeah, if he does go back to a team, I feel like maybe consultant or something like that, something kind
advisor.
Of a bit like Helmut Marko at Red Bull, maybe kind of off the side, maybe hopefully saying less kind of troublesome, problematic things, but Gunther Steiner, I think would be quite different to that. But him as a pundit would be tremendous.
Amazing.
Good.
I've got a dream of him, Danica, and Jensen Button just standing together, because I feel like that could be some of the most awkward and hilarious TV that's ever taken place.
Truly.
So yeah, let's watch this space. But I don't know if that's happening. But
he could do the grid walk with Martin Brundle.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Or when Martin can't do it. I would pay some good money for that.
But I always laugh. I think it was actually wasn't it Chris Medland? What did Gunter say?
Oh, fuck the paddock for 2 points.
Oh yeah. Fuck the paddock for 2 points. And poor Chris is just like, sorry for anyone listening to that. He was like, sorry for what? I said hug. And I was like, no, you didn't.
The great thing with that story was Chris came back to the media center after that, like just chuckling to himself, sat down and was telling us about it. And then we couldn't, he said what he thought, and we thought, oh, that sounds funny. He said, but the Netflix cameras were all there, and I feel like they've got it. And we listened back to it, and I thought he said, fuck the paddock for 2 points, listening to it. And he was like, I maybe it'll be in Netflix, or maybe his answer will be, but the whole thing to be there, I thought was great. I thought
it was amazing. So funny. Yeah. And I felt like Gunter had, you only see a small amount, right? Like you only see what's on for us, like whatever's on TV or when he's in interviews, but he just seemed to have so much heart, and he just gave a damn, and Gene was always just on the phone somewhere else. And so I hope he stays within the F1 family, but
it's a big loss.
Yeah. And Haas, I do also have a soft spot for Haas. So I hope they're not quote unquote ruined forever, but if they are, well,
well, we heard it here first if they are, right?
I guess so.
But just quickly on that, with Gunther, I think that his personality sometimes does him a disservice. I think people think, oh, he's just like a comedian.
It's like Daniel.
If you talk to exactly. If you talk to people at Haas, they say they are so loyal to him and they love him so much. It's almost, I think he's always, anytime the team has been in the firing line, he's basically taken all the flack, and then he's deflected the praise when they've done well. So from that point of view, that is something Komatsu's got to do, and it's hard to replicate that because when the pressure is on, sometimes it's really easy to kind of shade the blame elsewhere, and Steiner never really did that. Or if he did, he said, like when their pit stops were all over the place, he said we need to do better, but ultimately I'm the guy that needs to make that happen. So he would kind of blame the team but say, but I've got to change it. And they'll miss that, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's get to some of the storylines that I'm sure will be taking over all of our lives, Twitter feeds, Instagram, everything. The biggest one, at least in our lives, but I really think in general, is what's going to happen with the second Red Bull seat. Obviously, Checo's contract is up at the end of the year. A lot of discussion about who will maybe replace him. Lando's now off the board, but what do you think is going to happen? How do you see this playing out over the course of the season?
Yeah, so Lando, I thought was going to be in the mix for that.
Yeah,
obviously he's taken himself out of that equation. Ricardo, I feel like is everyone's logical step, but I'm in two minds about it, because I think if and I still hate saying it, if VCARB are up at the front this year, I feel like they might just say, well, let's keep Ricardo there. We'll keep Visa and Cash App happy that they've got him there if he's quick. And I think there's a disagreement fundamentally between Christian Horner and Helmut Marko about putting Ricardo back in the seat. I think Horner's quite happy to do that. I think Marko Marco was always more Max than Ricardo, going back to
Clearly.
when they were teammates together, and
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that Ricardo left. It was always a really interesting dynamic. He was more of a kind of Mattershitz guy, and Verstappen was, Helmut Marko kind of found him, and it was like his pride and joy. That still lingers a little bit, I think. And so I don't know. I just can't see a world where they'll, especially mid-season, where they would kind of just drop Ricardo in.
Okay.
But he's definitely in play. But I think that as much as people want to see it, I just think for Red Bull, they're looking at it from a business point of view as well. And Ricardo fits that VCARB situation so well. I think the big name that we're going to be talking about will be Albon, because I think that Red Bull, when you talk to people at Red Bull, it's interesting. I mentioned Sainz earlier. When you talk to people at Red Bull about Sainz, they say no, he just didn't do well enough. You talk to Red Bull about Gasly, they say the same, like, no, it was never good enough. You talked about Albon, and you get a sense from every single person you talk to, even Christian, there's almost a sense that there is a tinge of regret about how that all went down, and almost a feeling of, yeah, he didn't deliver a lot of the time, but he was also really unlucky. And I feel like the team felt very bad about the way they kind of got rid of him and brought Perez in. More so, and they've done that to a lot of drivers, but with Albon, they really seem to feel it. So I feel like the door there is open for him, and he's been so good at Williams. He's
So
kind
good.
of put himself back in there. So I actually think Albon's kind of the left field guy for, if he can be left field. I don't know if he's that left field, but he's more left field maybe than Danny Rick is.
Yeah. The only thing I think about with Alex is he has such a great situation at Williams right now as the lead guy. He's comfortable.
Yeah.
He's like, everything is going to revolve around Alex and what he wants with the team. And I don't know, there's a part of me that wonders from his perspective, if he's like, I don't know if I want to go back into this environment where I wasn't the guy, I'm the second guy. The team revolves around Max. And clearly he struggled with his confidence when he was with Red Bull. And I just wonder if it's like a fool me once, shame on you, you fool me twice, shame on me type of thing. Like, would he risk then being out of the sport again if he doesn't deliver? I don't know. Like, does he value his longevity in the sport and being with a team like Williams, maybe not winning races or as often, but like has more job security in a weird way?
Yeah.
I don't know.
A really good point. No, I think you're spot on. And I actually think Red Bull kind of have this issue with whoever they put in that car.
Right.
You're going to be Verstappen's teammate, and you've
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
got to walk them through it. And that's why actually, the more I think about it, the more I actually think there's a world where Perez just gets another deal next year for a couple of seasons, because I think Perez realistically I don't think he's ever going to end up at another top team. I think he's in a position now where he finally got the car where he can win a few races like he was always good enough to do. He knows the team, he's really popular within the team. People really like him. And I think they've realized he's been so battered by Verstappen. I think they've looked at it and said, well, this is like the fourth great driver we've had that has just been completely destroyed by this guy.
Right.
It feels like the issue isn't the other driver, as always.
Right.
The issue is how good Max is.
Yeah.
So I actually think Perez also could just get an extra deal just to save that headache of, we know when he's good, how good he can be. You've just got to manage that up and down. And I think you can still get that up and down with Ricardo. And like you said, Albon, you had that with him the first time. So in their head, it's like we could just be making a big change and a big fuss and a big mess and just being in the same situation.
Repeating. Yeah.
So I think they're in that position where, especially if they're as far ahead as they are this year as last year, it's not going to matter. Max could have won that. I think that he could have won the championship almost twice over, couldn't he? The constructors.
Yeah.
It's just with his points.
Yeah.
Which means Perez is kind of almost like
irrelevant.
When you play Monopoly, you've got like that get out of jail free card. It's always like he had that in his top pocket all season.
Yeah. Just quickly on that too. I know obviously Honda is going to Aston Martin, but is there any chance? I mean, I feel like he's never brought up in the conversation, but Yuki's ability to get that second seat, I don't feel like it's likely, but let's say he beats Daniel Ricciardo this year, like has a great showing. Is there any chance of him getting that seat?
I don't think there is, and that's really surprising for all those reasons. But you can tell that. I think it's funny when people at Red Bull get their head set on where a driver's ceiling is. It's very difficult to change that. And with Yuki, I think they've very quickly been like, mentally, they just don't think he's cut out to make that step up. But last year he was really good, and I think the fact his teammate changed 3 times last year meant the story was always about the other driver. But he had a really good season.
He did.
So I don't know. I feel like he would be. I think he's just such a wild card to put into that top seat. And I think
Yeah.
when you already know that Max is going to be quite mentally challenging, I
Yeah.
think for them they look at it. And Yuki, I love Yuki, great character. But if you're looking at it from a management point of view, you probably think, look, let's not do that
Yeah.
because that just could be that could be complete chaos. And
Yeah.
so I actually think Yuki will do better as soon as he gets out of that Red Bull situation. I think he'll
Yeah.
a bit like Sainz, like get out of there
Yeah.
Mhm.
and just go and do your own thing somewhere else because he's good enough to be in Formula One for a long time. I just think where he is now at Red Bull is where he stays.
He's like reached
You
a
know,
ceiling with them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
we've joked. I don't know how it's ever going to happen, given the situation, but we said we would love to see Yuki and Fernando be teammates.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. But I mean, that could be it at
I
Aston. I
know.
mean,
Yeah.
obviously, you'd need Lawrence to kind of drop his son. Lawrence
Right.
will drop his son.
Right.
But weirder things have happened in Formula One.
That's
That's
very
so
true.
true.
And yeah, I think Yuki to Aston, with Honda coming in, that
Yeah.
does seem to be in his head, kind of where it's just kind of keep yourself performing well, and then when Aston are ready to make that call, they'll make they'll make that
Mhm.
they'll make that move.
Yep.
So I'd be surprised if he didn't end up there at some point.
For sure. For sure. Do we want to talk about if anyone can challenge Red Bull?
Honestly, yes, because I love Max. I really do. He's one of my favorite drivers. I say this all the time. I'm so bored that I want him to start from the back of the grid every race because it's more interesting. And I feel like obviously I'm still, we're still new here, but when you have your favorite driver, it's almost like the Super Bowl thing. It's like, it's really fun that the Chiefs have been in the Super Bowl for so many years, but I used to hate it when the Patriots were doing it all of the time.
Right.
And it's kind of that, I'm really happy for Max that his childhood dream has come true. And I also am really sad that none of these other kids' dreams are coming true. And I just
Yeah.
I want to watch him race. I don't want to watch him 30 seconds ahead of everyone for 2 hours. So please tell me that someone's going to be able to challenge him this year because I trust you.
I would love to
Okay.
say we're going to have a 2021 season again. I think start of the year, I can't see it happening. I
Yeah.
think we're going to see Red Bull quite ahead. But I know we heard it a lot last year, but teams feel like they're making such gains with these cars, and Red Bull have probably started to top out with the progress they're making. The hope would be that McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, their kind of trajectory catches up to Red Bull mid to late this year, and then we have a great season next season, which is never the sexiest thing to say. Like, hey, keep watching because next year it might be really good,
Yeah. Right.
But I think we've never seen a team that dominant in Formula One, so to catch them in the space of one winter. If Red Bull had kind of had been locked out of their factory all winter, I might think maybe they could have been
Sure.
if they'd just lost the keys and couldn't get back in.
Yeah.
But obviously they're developing a great car as well, so it's hard to see it. But you're completely right, Hannah, about the Patriots, because I have so many friends who, when Lewis was winning, couldn't stand him, and now that he hasn't won for 2 years, some of them say to me like, "Lewis, man, I quite like him at the moment," and I'm like, "Yes, because he's not winning."
Yeah.
It's because when you're seeing him, he's finishing third, he's finishing fourth, and sometimes he's still pissed off that he hasn't won, or he's complimentary about Lando and he's not won the race and just talking about how great his car is. And some people now, even though we know how good Max is, it's like, oh, well, if the car wasn't that good, he wouldn't be winning, which is kind of true. But at the same time, Max is just an unbelievable driver.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah, it is fascinating. But sadly, I think that continues, for the time being at the very least.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that we're going to get an Andretti on the grid? Like, what's the likelihood of that actually happening?
I think low still.
I know. I
honestly,
do too.
which is really sad because I think it would be great for Formula One to have them in. Both, I think it'd actually be better to have Cadillac in than just Andretti, just as the brand.
Yeah.
But obviously 2 more seats, a new team boss, just a whole new storyline for a few years. But the teams are so insular in their viewpoint. They're so against the idea of a team coming in, just kind of sharing the pie, with them. And to go back to the Haas example, Gene Haas would be turned around, and Gunther said this as well. We came into Formula One in 2016 when times were bad. We weathered the storm, and now we're benefiting. We're reaping the rewards of our investment. If Andretti just come in and start taking these huge profits, a lot of the other teams are like, well, where were you when times were tough? So, and I think it was in Vegas, we asked the team bosses about them, And James Vowles was quite sneaky. He said, "Oh, I'd love to see Cadillac in. I mean, they could come in as a partner of Williams if they wanted to, you know." So it was very much that I think Formula One really does want Cadillac to come in, but they don't. They're not fussed if it says an 11th team for Andretti. They would rather they came in as a partner to another team.
Sure.
And ultimately, that's kind of the issue that you've got with Formula One. It is this kind of, it's a closed shop that has an open sign on the door, but it is actually, the door is locked. It's it likes to kind of give the impression that it's an open shop to other interested parties. And that again is why Visa and Cash App, their best investment was not let's go buy a team, let's go and buy partnership with an existing team. So I think you'll see a lot more of that. So I hope I'm wrong, but there's also a whole F1 FIA kind of dynamic at play, and the fact the two really can't stand each other that much, it seems, at the moment. And the FIA put Andretti forward. I think that just, if that had been handled better by the FIA, I think maybe Andretti would have a better chance. But they're very much seen as this is just the FIA's kind of baby, and we don't, F1's kind of reluctant to do it. So I would be surprised if that happens. I'd love to see it. Andretti say they can be ready for next year, I think, start of 25.
Wow.
So we'll see. I think I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Michael Andretti has almost completely changed his media strategy, because before it was, I'm just going to talk all the time and kind of insult the teams as much as I can. He's not really said anything that newsworthy for a while. I think he's done that on purpose to kind of to almost put the pressure on the F1 team a little bit, to kind of make them look like the bad guys, which I think they kind of do look like that at the moment.
Yeah. It's like if they can't get in, then like no one's ever gonna get in. And I from my perspective too, it's like I guess also part of it is like from an American sports perspective too, like we have so many teams and franchises and all different types of sports, and in our minds it's like, well, more is more, like more is better. And like, why not have more drivers, more opportunities, more chances for like other people to get involved, other names to stick around. It does seem so like, oh, someone has a rough season and they're out and there's nowhere for them to fall because there's no seats available. Right. And so it just seems a little bit, I mean, obviously I don't think they should have 20 teams and 40 cars and all that stuff, but it does seem strange. It's like, this seems like the perfect package to come into Formula One. And so if they don't succeed, then I don't see how anyone would be able to succeed. Right.
Yeah. And I think Formula One has to be worried as well that when there's obviously this boom period happening now,
right? But
let's say this, as it seems to be kind of smoothing out at the moment, if there might be a time in 5-6 years where one of the teams, like Alpine, I always look at, obviously Renault runs that team. At some point, if they keep finishing fifth, they might say, right, we want to go, we're out. We're not getting our money. Then Formula One will be in a position where they're like, man, if only we'd taken Andretti a few years ago, because now we've got 9 teams and we've just had a team leave. It's much harder to attract a team in when someone's just left, because it's like, well, why are they leaving?
Right.
What's the, it's like, like leaving a sinking ship almost.
Right.
So you kind of feel like F1's missing the chance to build while this popularity is there. And I think, I really hope that doesn't come to be. But yeah, and the other thing with having extra places, if teams are talking about, the first woman driving in Formula One for however long it's been, for getting younger drivers coming in, for, different partnerships and stuff, there's just an extra chance for that all to happen. And I think like that is where it's really short-sighted
Agreed.
for Formula One. And yeah, it just doesn't help anyone feel anything different other than these teams are just in it for themselves, which is kind of what made Drive to Survive so good. But you just wish that they could put the sport ahead of their own interests occasionally. And it just doesn't seem like that is the case.
For sure. Okay, to wrap things up, I feel like this is the biggest storyline that's going to take over the season. And we've sort of had stuff answered in the last handful of weeks, but it's the driver market and silly season and the seats that will be opened up and the movement that may or may not happen. Are there any like moves that you are fairly certain are going to happen, or you would, if you were a betting man, you would bet your money on, okay, this is going to happen?
I'm only a betting man when it comes to, I only bet on the Super Bowl and on how long the anthem is going to be and how like the color of the Gatorade and stuff. So I'm not a very good better. I think to be honest, Albon to Red Bull, if I was putting anything down, I would, just because I feel like everything's aligning for that to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe more so than Ricciardo. I'd love to see Ricciardo go back to Red Bull, but I feel like Albon, it just feels like it's his time to go back. I think the thing that will be interesting and that will dictate everything is what Fernando does if he stays around. So obviously, if he leaves, that's a really great seat for somebody. But if it's still a really good seat, I think he'll stay around. If they're still competitive, he's got nowhere else to go. Fernando's still as good as he ever was. I feel like he can just sign another 2-year deal and just be done with it. So I actually feel like there could be another year where we don't see anyone leave. Because last year, somebody told me this. It was the first time in about 30 years there was no movement whatsoever. No one moved teams. Everyone stayed exactly where they were. Which, when you think about it, is kind of remarkable. There's not even one move. Which, I hadn't clocked it until I think when Sargent signed his deal.
I mean, the Nick DeVries thing kind of throws it.
Yeah, right.
Caveat.
So, yeah, that's true. Big caveat. I think the stat was from the last race of this year to first race of race of last year to the first race of this year. But you're right, because I said, what about DeVries? And then I was very quickly shut down. But that could happen again if the Perez situation I mentioned happened, because I could also just see that being extended. So I think if I was making a bet on somebody on a big move, I would say it will involve that Aston seat with Alonso, or it will involve the Perez seat. I don't really see anything else major happening just because of where we're at with contracts. But Sainz could surprise us. He might just decide one day, hey, I want to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That is the case. I don't know where, other than going to that Sauber project a bit early, I don't see where he would go. So, sorry, I've sat on the fence a couple of times when you guys have asked me questions.
No,
I
it's
feel
fine.
like that was...
I change my mind like every day about this stuff.
Yeah.
So
you guys could ask me tomorrow and I'll be like, yeah, Lewis to Ferrari, definitely. 100%. And then the next day I'll be like, nah, probably pretty quiet, pretty quiet around.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't be shocked if Logan doesn't get re-signed. I feel like this is, he's gonna have to like show some serious improvement. Otherwise, I could see him getting the boot. And also, I feel like the Haas situation with Kevin and with Nico, I don't know. I mean, Haas is obviously playing it very safe, but I feel like if they're both sort of underperforming, if the team's I could see there being something happening with them, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And it's kind of, I like K-Mag a lot, and I think Hulkenberg actually did really well last year. But if you're Gene Haas, you're probably like, we could probably have a better lineup just from the outs, just looking in.
Right.
And yeah, Logan, I was surprised Logan stayed on, honestly. I don't know if you guys felt the same.
I was.
So it feels like he's on borrowed time a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's not helped by the fact that Albon's so good, because I think Albon kind of makes him look pretty bad. But yeah, there's a young kid who's joining F2 called Andrea Kimi Antonelli. It's Mercedes Junior. Obviously has a great name because it's got Kimi in it. He is with the Prema team in F2. I think he could be an outside bet for that Williams seat. If he wins Formula 2, I think Mercedes will put him in at Williams. That would be my really long shot prediction. And he's really exciting. He's Italian. I think he's 18. Italy hasn't had a world champion since the 50s, which is just insane.
That is crazy.
So I feel like if he came in, he'd be, and he looks like, these young tennis players that come in, they have like long hair, kind of like very good jaw lines. He kind of looks like that. So I feel like in terms of like the full package, in a few years, he might well have it.
Yeah.
But I don't know enough about his junior career to make that. I just know everyone who follows the junior pyramid has been talking about this kid for a long time. So he might be a really left field bold prediction. Clip that up, and if it does happen, I'll look like an absolute genius. If it doesn't, we can just discard it. And
we'll never talk about it again.
No, I love it.
Right? Yeah, I feel like Ferrari might have an aneurysm though if they get an Italian wins, but it's not with Ferrari.
That would be Charles will have an aneurysm. Poor guy.
Yeah.
If anyone besides him wins anything, poor guy. I'm so worried for him. Truly. I mean, I know he resigned, and that's he chose to do that, but
it's an okay life. I think
I know it's an okay life. I just feel sad for him.
Yeah, but I feel like, Hannah, you made a really good point when you said about you feel bad that you see Max winning when all these other kids aren't. And that's actually, I was thinking about this the other day, that there's almost, we've got this great generation of drivers, probably the most talented the grid's ever been. And yet we could have in 10 years a situation where we look at it and we say, it could be like the most unfulfilled grid if it goes the way it is right now. Because, Charles has only got 5 race wins, which is just mad when you see how many crazy. Lando's not won yet. George has got 1 win.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of all of those guys.
I've never seen Max DNF before. Since I've come into Formula, I've never seen it happen. Like I don't.
Is that crazy?
So bizarre. Like
that is mad, but
it's so weird. I've never seen Lewis win. We only saw his first P1 this last season.
Pole.
Yeah, right.
Or pole.
So did you? So you guys started just after in 22, wasn't it?
I started watching the start of the 2022 season, and Max DNF'd that first race, and then he DNF'd like the couple of weeks after. But Hannah started like maybe 4 races into the 2022 season.
Yeah.
So she missed all of that
So
stuff.
it's all you know. It's all you guys know.
It's all she knows.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah.
And I only know Lewis was good because of, history and GTS.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing about Drive to Survive, because I know a lot of fans that came in and they were like, I know Ricardo's good, but I've never seen it.
Yeah.
like I know, so there is that part to it. Whereas I've been an NFL fan for about 10 years.
Okay.
So when I kind of jumped in, I knew the Patriots were good, and then they started winning immediately. So I saw it and I was told about it. Whereas I think with Formula One, it's harder to do that. If Max is winning everything, it's like, why are the other 19 guys still racing against them? What's the point? Like, what are they doing? What's the end goal? So
I tried to explain it to my dad a few times. He's like, I just don't understand why anyone wants to be in this sport if he's the only one that wins all of the time. Like, no one else has a chance. I'm like, well, they do kind of. And he's like, I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't know why you watch
what? It's like, well, Dad, he might in a few years, okay? Win. So just be patient, and then we'll have a great season again.
Yeah, it's like being a Buffalo Bills fan. Sorry if that triggers anyone out there, but
well, growing up, I was a big. My nonna's Italian, so I grew up as a Ferrari fan, and it was the same with Schumacher. I'd try and tell friends like, "Hey, I watch Formula One." They'd be like, "Well, that Schumacher guy just wins all the time." I'm like, "Yeah,
exactly.
It's great."
Awesome. Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, why wouldn't you watch it?" But then totally understood from their point of view why they wouldn't want to do it. But F1 does go through these weird cycles where that happens, where it's like one guy, and everyone else is just like, I'm better than him. I could do that.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not sure it's true with Max, but
we're Chiefs fans. Like we feel the same way. It's like it's cool for us over here. Things are great.
The Taylor Swift supports our team.
Yeah,
it's very exciting.
We just win all the time, and it's fun.
For you guys this year, that must have just been like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened.
Oh, it's insane.
I feel like no matter what, I mean, obviously, regardless of what happens, people when they hear this, they will know whether or not the Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl.
True.
But I feel like regardless of what happened this season, it's like this was the season of Taylor Swift, and that was our gift. That was what.
Yeah, it was our Super Bowl, and we won it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I keep forgetting that this time last year, everyone was talking about Fernando potentially, which was the most random. And I've asked a few people in the paddock, and I think that was just completely made up.
It was completely.
I think he made it up.
I reckon a lot of people have said, I'm dating Taylor Swift in the past, but people just believed him when he said it, and then it just got out.
I know. Well, now because Travis Kelce is an investor in Alpine, we do hope that there is a Taylor Swift Fernando meetup at some point, and everything can come full circle.
I did hear a rumor that Aston invited Taylor to a race last year, but because of the whole thing, I think the feeling was, we don't want to kind of give this weird rumor that you made up any validation.
Right.
And I think it may have clashed with because obviously she had that big tour this year.
Yeah.
But there's been a few times when people have said Taylor Swift might come to the paddock, and I think when she does, the race might not even happen, because I think everyone, the whole place will just be gridlocked.
I don't know if she's going to be on tour during Miami, but I feel like Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce have been to Miami before and are now Alpine investors. So I wouldn't be surprised if they show up at the Miami race. And if Taylor isn't touring, I hope she graces us with her presence as well. And we will be in Miami. And so
that was my next question.
We have a wonderful friend who's getting married the weekend of COTA, so we won't be there this year.
No. Weddings always fall on F1 weekends. I've found that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously always pick the wedding, but you're always like, I hope it's not a good one. I miss it.
Yeah. She felt bad when she like perfectly knows about Formula One, and obviously knows that we love it. And when she found out, she was like, "Oh my God, you should have told me. I would have changed." I was like, "No, I'm not going to tell you to change your wedding date for me." But I mean, that would be nice. No, we're very happy.
Oh, that would have been pretty awesome. Although when you turned up and everyone was like, "This date was really awkward and uncomfortable," you'll be like, "Yeah, that's so I could go to an F1 race."
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a long time coming. We so appreciate you as our e-news.
Yeah, I really can't thank you enough. I mean, honestly, anytime I have a question, I'm not really sure. I literally say, has Nate tweeted about it yet? And she's like, no. I'm like, well, until I hear from, honestly, you or Chris, it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, and Chris tweets so much. I mean, I sit next to him a lot of the time in the media center. And I joked to him that sometimes he tweets before things happen. Like
Mm,
during a race, I'm almost
Mhm.
like I'm like watching his Twitter feed as much as the race because I feel
Right.
like it's as
He's-
good. So
yeah.
I need to kind of up my game a bit to be with Chris. But no, but I appreciate that. It's always nice to hear. So
Yes.
thanks so much.
Where
And I
can
loved,
people?
loved coming on.
Thank you. Where can people find you? I know you have a podcast, so please plug all your things so people can get the facts straight from
Absolutely.
the horse's mouth.
So articles on ESPN.com/Formula One, and I'm on 2 pods because I just, I can't get enough of one. I like hearing
course.
my own voice, obviously.
Mhm.
One is ESPN Unlapped, which is with Katie George and my colleague Lawrence Edmondson, and then the Paddock, which is the show that you guys just missed by half an hour in Austin, which is with Lawrence Barretto for Formula One and with Chris Medland as well. So that's a bit more. I mean, it always starts with me telling a very bad joke, etc. So it's a bit kind of more lighthearted, but either of those 2 are great. And yeah, I mean, loads of things to talk about this year. So I'm sure we'll, it's funny actually doing 2 because sometimes you record one and then you go and record the other one, and you're like, I feel like I'm saying exactly the same again. I got myself into that situation. So
Yeah.
That's so funny. Okay, you probably don't know this, but we end our show every week by saying enchanté.
Oh, okay. Nice.
As the goodbye. Yeah. We still haven't heard anything from Daniel or the enchanté brand about this closing remark, but hopefully enough time will pass. We'll get it.
Probably because we haven't clipped it for social media. It's only ever on the end of the podcast, which they're not listening to. So we'll work on that.
Once you get that on TikTok, get the ball rolling, send it to them.
I'll do
a
whole compilation.
Do you guys have enchanté merch? Because it's pretty damn good.
It's great.
Oh,
yeah.
We have lots. That's why, I mean, we're basically like...
I basically just, give him all my money every time. I swipe my Visa every time enchanté.
I was going to say, I hope
drop.
you use Cash App now to do that.
Yeah. No,
we should film an ad. Film an ad for him.
Yeah.
But would you do us the honors
Absolutely.
of closing out the show with an enchanté?
You just want to say it? It's just a straight...
However, I mean, we do enchanté. We do it kind of up, but you can do it however you want to do it.
I feel like it's got to be said with a slight French accent. So
sure.
Say,
when you're ready.
Enchanté.
Oh, well, that was the best we've had yet. Ours sounds so American.
I mean, I don't know how good that was. I feel like that wasn't very French or very good.
That was great. Thank you so much, Nate.
Great. Thanks very much, guys.
Bye.